Good morning, folks. I'm going to just kick off after last night's proceedings. You're hereby summoned to attend the reconvened meeting of the Health and Community Committee, which will be held remotely via WebEx on Friday, the 9th of December at 11 a.m. And I'm going to ask the Director to take us through attendance and apologies. Karen?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Alderman Devaney?
Here, Karen.
Alderman Guy has sent apologies. Alderman Kerrigan? Councillor Boyd? Councillor Doyle? Councillor Edwards?
Apologies.
Councillor Farrell?
Here.
Councillor Ferguson?
Here, Karen.
I know Councillor Fleming is trying to join, so Councillor Fleming? Councillor Harkin? Councillor Jackson?
He's just finishing up in another meeting, Karen. He'll be joining us shortly.
Okay, and Councillor McGinley?
I'm sure.
Okay, Councillor Sonoya Barr?
Here.
And Councillor Tierney?
He will be here. He's not here currently.
Okay, thank you. I just note other attendances as they enter through the chat box. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Karen. I'm going to read the statement for remote meetings. I would like to remind everyone who is in remote attendance that this meeting will be broadcast live via the Council's YouTube channel and will be available for viewing by the public and media. The broadcast will also be available for repeated viewing at a later date. This broadcast may be terminated or suspended in accordance with Council protocol. Members and approved speakers are reminded to only have their mics and cameras on while speaking at the meeting and to use the chat facility to highlight a request to speak. By participating in this meeting, you're consenting to being filmed and to the use and storage of those images for broadcasting or training purposes and for the purpose of keeping historical records and making those records available to the public. A copy of this Council privacy notice may be found on the Council's website. Item 4 is declaration of members' interest. So if you have any, you can declare them verbally or put them in the chat box. And I'd just like to inform everyone, I'm deputising for Councillor Edwards. He can't make today. Unfortunately, I have a CTRIC board meeting at 11:30, and if I don't attend, they're not going to have quorum. So I'm going to pass on to my party colleague, Brian Tierney, at 11:30, if that's okay. So the first item on this reconvened agenda is item 5, which is the consultation on the Food Law Code of Practice. And I'm going to ask Seamus Donaghy to take us through that item. Seamus?
Thanks, Chair, and I'll be brief. The purpose of the report is to inform members of the Food Standards Agency consultation on proposed changes to the Food Law Code of Practice. The FSA proposed to amend the Code of Practice to help ensure councils can target resources at the areas of greatest risk within the food chain, and the proposed new food standards delivery models outlined in the report, and it's recommended members note and approve the consultation response.
Thanks for that, Seamus. I've got no one indicating in the chat box. Would anybody like to comment on that item? That's a no. Would anybody like to propose it?
I'll make a proposal, Alderman Devaney.
Thank you, Morris. Thank you, Rachel. So item 6 is the Good Relations Audit and Strategy 2022 to 2025. And for that, we have Barry O'Hagan. Barry?
Thanks, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to seek your approval for the Good Relations Audit Strategy and Action Plan from 22 to 25. Members, you'll be aware previously into 2021, we gave approval to undertake the development of this action plan for 3 years and appointed Rubicon consultant to complete the work. All funding is provided through the Executive Office. You'll be aware that we also presented this to the Good Relations Working Group, and the document presented was agreed to go forward to committee. So members, you'll see in section 3.5 we have a number of new programmes for the action plan for the next 3 years: breaking barriers, tackling racism and sectarianism, normalising peace building, democracy in action, specialty good relations initiatives. And members, you'll also see in section 3.6 have suggested that £50,000 cross-cutting strategic element be introduced as part of the overall £200,000 small grants programme. And this is aimed at giving the grant aid programme a greater strategic focus. And it would be at district-wide level and would target a particular theme each year in the 3 years, members. And within this particular programme, members, we would also be bringing further reports around the scope, context, and how that programme would roll out. So members, in terms of the recommendation, that you approve the Good Relations Audit Strategy and Action Plan 2022 to 25. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. So we have one indicated speaker currently, and that's Councillor Sianoy Barr. Lillian?
Thank you, Vice Chair. And let me start by expressing the SDLP's appreciation to officers for all their hard work on the draft Good Relations Strategy. And I also want to acknowledge the people who took part in the consultation, offering really valuable feedback that has led to a detailed plan that, in my view, responds to the needs of our communities. I am particularly pleased to see the emphasis around training on systemic racism and sectarianism, and a clear focus on bias and Black history, and the marking of the UN Decade of African Descent as a result of my previous motion. Members' knowledge is a key element of tackling racism and sectarianism. And I think it is right to say that the Derry City and Strabane District Council is the first council in the whole of the North to adopt an anti-racism and anti-sectarianism ethos. And I'm really happy to be associated with the council and also to approve this, to propose that we approve this strategy. I also want to speak about a recent BBC report aired on The View on the 24th of November 2022, where a civil servant raised concerns around the implementation of the racial equality strategy, because this is very related to the work of our Good Relations audit today. It is important that this council recognizes the impact on Black and minority ethnic individuals that goes beyond the wider failures of government to deliver on health, on education, and the cost of living crisis, which has been exacerbated by the absence of ministers and led to a complete breakdown in decision-making. The North of Ireland has an acknowledged problem of sectarianism, but for the past 6 years, the number of incidents and crimes with a racist motivation has exceeded the number of sectarian incidents and crimes. The most recent PSNI report on hate crime shows that in the last 12 months, from October 1st, 2021 to 30th of September 2022, there were more hate incidents recorded across each hate motivation strand when compared with the previous 12 months, with the exception of faith and religion incidences. While there are more racist, homophobic, sectarian, and disability hate crimes recorded, we have no hate crime legislation that can deal with these issues. The figures are even more striking when you compare that the 1,240 racist hate crimes are only directly affects 4% of the population. This is to say the likelihood of an individual from a minoritized ethnic background experiencing racism in Northern Ireland is 29 times higher than the likelihood of an individual from the two dominant communities experiencing sectarian incidents. Sadly, as I said, we have no legislation to protect people as the victims of these crimes. The experience of a Derry nurse a very good friend of mine, Beverly Symptoms, who was racially abused by a patient repeatedly over many hours with no action taken, is a good example of the daily racism faced by individuals going about their own lives. But there is something we can do about it. If we are the only part with no standalone hate crime legislation, a person can face racial, homophobic, or disability-related hate crime. But unless the abuse can be linked to some other crime, such as assault or a public order offense, the police can't do anything about it. They cannot intervene. And we had a review of the hate crime legislation, which examined hate crime in all its form, urged the adoption of a fresh law to tackle this problem. But the proposal remains in limbo, and we are told it cannot be enacted in primary legislation due to the lack of a functioning government. Ethnic monitoring, which also help us to identify the gaps in service delivery and in supporting minority ethnic people, which has been implemented in England, Scotland, and Wales, is still missing in Northern Ireland. Now, I am very pleased when I read the strategy that aspect of monitoring is included in the good relations strategy, that the audit strategy that we have now. But this needs to be replicated right across the province. And for this reason, and in the absence of the functioning executive, the SDLP believes the Secretary of State and the British government should now intervene to implement a modern racial equality strategy that meets the need of the Northern Ireland diverse and changing population. And this is why I would like to make a proposal that this council writes directly to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, asking him to use his powers to bring hate crime legislation before the Westminster Parliament as a matter of urgency, and asking him to instruct officials to implement in full the recommendation made in the independent report commissioned by the Executive Office in 2018 on ethnic equality monitoring. Chair, the situation of gross unfairness, which fails to address equality for all in Northern Ireland, cannot and should not be allowed to continue. There is already a precedent on this. Marriage equality was delivered by Westminster. Abortion rights were delivered by Westminster. A language right have been introduced via Westminster. We have a problem in delivering equality for all in Northern Ireland, and we need to accept that and do what we can to provide, to support every single community that exists here. We have waited patiently for 17 years. Equality legislation and protection for minority communities in Northern Ireland should not be held back any longer because we don't have an executive. We have a route to ensure we deliver that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lillian. Can we see the actual proposal? Can you put it in the chat box, or have you sent it to the committee section? And I note you have a seconder and Councillor Tierney. I see that Lorraine has it, and she's going to share that on the screen for us now. So thank you, Lorraine. So I'll give you all a minute to read and digest Councillor Sainoy Barr's proposal. Right, so it's been proposed, it's been seconded. Do we have any councillors who wish to comment on this? Alderman Devaney?
Thank you, Vice Chair, for allowing me in. And look, I have no problem in supporting this recommendation coming forward here. And I have to say, there is no place in our society for sectarianism, racism or even hate crime, whether it be on social media or whatever it may be. And I do appreciate the proposal coming from Councillor Sonoy Barr. It's a very, very important one, and we have no problem in supporting it. But Vice Chair, a lot of this hate crime that I see goes on is on types of social media forums, and a lot of those people on these forums, their anonymity, nobody knows who they are. And I know our MP Carla Lockhart has been raising the issue in around Westminster, and look, it has been through a huge amount of scrutiny and around this. And she complained very clearly that the government's decision to remove the proposed offensive harmful communication. This is not to say that the behaviour does not exist, that we should do nothing about it. It's difficult to tackle behaviour and content when it is deemed harmful but not criminal. I think that maybe is a very, very, very important part. And being able to identify these people, especially this type of stuff that is ongoing online, we can't identify who the person is. I think that is one of the cruxes, the nuts that needed to be cracked to deal with this. But Chair, I have no problem in supporting this, because in my 17, 18 years as a politician, I have been verbally abused around walking along the streets, the roads, with sectarian abuse. What I would say is hateful sectarian abuse, and it continues. And I believe it needs to stop. And yes, we all say it should be reported to the police and stuff. But yes, these things happen, and sometimes we as politicians, we're thought to be, broad-shouldered and around a lot of stuff. But we take it on the chin. But I can tell you, Chair, or Vice Chair, when you have abuse hurled at you walking along the street, even being spat at and spat upon, that type of activity has to stop, Chair. And we should be living in a more civil society, so we should. But very, very happy to support that proposal.
Thank you, Alderman Devaney, and I totally concur with your remarks. Next indicated speaker is Councillor Ferguson. Rachel.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you to Councillor Sonoy Barr for bringing the proposal. We're happy to support the proposal. Unlike Councillor Devaney, I actually have had experience of dealing with a lot of families who are receiving a lot of hate crimes against them, and it could be anything from being tortured on a nightly basis because they are seen as not from the community. So I think the legislation is needed, and unfortunately, due to the lack of Stormont, it isn't progressing. I know the consultation finished there in March this year, and we were looking forward to hopefully seeing that progress through Stormont. So I'm more than happy to support the motion and think that it is something that needs to be done very, very soon, because I know many families being impacted and unfortunately aren't being able to process it properly through the current system. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Would anyone else like to comment on this? Councillor Tierney, Brian?
Chair, thank you. And only too happy to second the proposal from Councillor Barr, Sonoy Barr, sorry. And whenever Lillian was telling me yesterday when we were at committee, some of the figures across the north, and then broke it down across our district, I was completely shocked at the number of people who had actually reported being the victim of hate or racial crime. I have, I suppose, probably like others, been contacted over the weekend where people feel that they were a victim of hate crime in this city, and I think it's appalling. I have always spoken out against it, and I'm glad to see and hear that the DUP are speaking out against it as well, because I think the message needs to be sent right across our community that we will not tolerate it, and we will not stand for it. And I think that this proposal from Councillor Sonoy Barr, asking the Secretary of State to use his power to step in to do all that they can to help support people and to eradicate it would be good. But when it's completely shocking whenever you see it happen on the streets of your own city, literally only a few days ago. And I think this is a timely proposal from Councillor Sonoy Barr, given some of the incidents that we've seen recently. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. And our next indicated speaker is Councillor Boyle. Michaela?
Thank you, Chair. We'd be supporting the proposal, the motion. I've listened to some of the comments, and I just see, you know, in terms of race hate crime, there's more and more. It's been more and more prevalent. And I see a lot in social media, particularly in the south, where you see groups on the rise, you know, attacking verbally, vocally, and in person, attacking people who are coming here to live. And I know in Strabane where we would have second and that, and I know Derry is obviously the city where the numbers are larger, but in Strabane and in our area, that, you know, there's it's not that that's not happening, it does happen, but my concern is it goes under the radar and it's not being reported and people are afraid to report. So absolutely, you know, in terms of bringing about hate crime legislation as a matter of urgency, I think given the police stats and others that we've seen recently, that it's the right thing to do. So we'd be supportive of the motion.
Thank you, Michaela.
Thank
And
you.
I have no further indicated speakers. There's been no dissent, so that has passed unanimously. So the proposer was Councillor St. Barr and the seconder was Councillor Tierney. So next item on the agenda is again related to good relations grant funding. So Barry?
Thanks, Chair. Members, the purpose of this report is to update the additional funding from the Executive Office for the Good Relations Programme, and we can utilise that for reserve grant aid projects. To update you on the additional projects being supported under Community Development and Good Relations Programme as a result of underspends, to seek your approval on the allocation of key holding fees to Leaf for Wellbeing Enterprises, and to seek your approval also for key holding fee to Spring Hill Park Area Residents and Youth Association as part of the shared management agreements for both those centres. Members, on the key holding fees, as part of our council-owned community managed centres, a key holding fee is allocated to the lead group within the shared management agreement, and the formula around that is £1,000 baseline standard and then £3 per square metre based on the size of the centre. So members, you'll be aware of the Good Relations and the Community Support Grant Aid. We had 7 applications under Good Relations, totaling 13,650, who couldn't be funded due to the lack of funding. And the Community Development Grant Aid Programme had an underspend in funding in Waterside of 10,496 and in Foyleside £3,830. The Community Development Coordinators have worked with the local growth partnerships to find suitable projects to utilise the funding. Members had agreed previously that should further funding become available during the year, we would fund those groups that were above the threshold, and that all funding committed each DA would remain on DA. So members, at the end of October, the Executive Office offered the Council an extra £7,050, and we have to match fund it to bring it up to 9,400, and we're finding those monies within savings. So you'll see within section 3.5, the 6 groups we're suggesting that we fund on the amounts, and also the coordinators have worked with the LGPs in Waterside and Foyleside around underspend. So we're proposing an award of 10,496 to Waterside Neighbourhood Partnership to provide a warm hub for the area, and 3,830 to BHCP and Foyleside as they were unsuccessful in their application to the Community Venues Fund, and those have both been agreed by local growth partnerships. Also, Good Relations officers are looking at allocating underspends in other areas in Ballyarnett. The LGP is looking to allocate funding to Greater Shantallow Area Partnership, just over £5,000. That's made up of a grant aid underspend and DA initiatives, and that's to undertake a historical and cultural programme in the area. Foyleside are still considering the options, and we'll bring a further report back to members. So, members, the budgets exist within underspends and within our community centre budget. So, in terms of recommendations, that you note the content of the report in terms of the additional allocations. that you agreed for the allocations for Waterside Neighbourhood Partnership, Ballyarnett and Hazelbank Community Partnership, and also for Shantallow Area Partnership, and that you approved the key holding fee for both Leafair and for Spring Hill. And members, those were oversights. Those were two new centres that have come on board in the last number of years, as members will be aware, as council owned, community managed. So we're now proposing that we put those in place after approval of full council. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Barry. And our only indicated speaker currently is Councillor Tierney. Brian?
Thank you, Chair. And I suppose first of all, I just want to declare a non-pecuniary interest as I'm a director of the Greater Shantallow Area Partnership and a member of the Ballyarnett Local Growth Partnership. But I'm happy to propose the recommendations in bulk. I think it's frightening and I suppose in many ways shocking that some of this money in terms of good relations is going to create warm hubs across our district. Fair play to the community and voluntary workers for having the foresight to do this, but it's a complete failure of government, in my opinion, that they even have to be thinking on this. In relation to the key holders fee at Leafair, I want to thank the officers for their work around this, and this has been going on for quite some time in relation to that particular building. I know what this money will go to support at Leafair, and I think it's right that we try and do that. There's a wider issue in terms of the management of that particular facility in terms of car parking, and officers have been more than supportive of the organisation to try and help and support them through that. And this key holders fee will help and allow the community organisation to manage the parking issues down there until we come up with a more sustainable and suitable answer to that particular problem. But this was in relation to the Leafair aspect of it. This was a huge issue for residents in Leafair Park and Leafair Gardens and users of that particular facility, and the officers of council have exhausted all avenues and been very supportive of the organisation and trying to get this in place. And I know that the organisation thank and appreciate the officers for their work around that. So, Chair, just on behalf of the organisation, to thank the officers for doing that and to support and propose the recommendations with those declarations of interest declared as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. Have we any other indicated speakers? Would anybody else like to comment, or is somebody happy to just propose or second this item?
I'll second it, Rory.
Thank you, Emma. It's now 11:28. I need to jump on to the CDRIC board meeting. Items 8, 9, 10 and 11 are all open for information. I'm going to hand the chair over to Councillor Tierney now, if he doesn't mind. It's been a pleasure, as always, folks.
Thank you, Rory. And I don't intend to keep you very long. You'll be glad to hear. So we'll push on to item 8 is for open for information. Is that right? The items 8 to 11 are open for information. Is there any item that any members wishing to raise? And I'm on an iPad, so I'm struggling to see the chat box. No, we'll take those.
There's nothing recorded in the chat box at this point.
No bar count, thank you. So members, will take those items as noted. And can I get a proposer to move?
We'll propose Alderman Devaney to move into confidential.
Thank you. Morris?
Michaela, second that.
Can IT let us know when the stream is